The briefcase sat under the chair like it had always belonged there, patient, unremarkable, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. Marcus Carter had set it down at 7:43 in the morning, ordered his usual black coffee with no sugar, and spent the next 90 minutes working through contracts on his laptop with the focused quiet of a man who had long since stopped needing to impress anyone. He wore a dark olive field jacket over a plain gray Henley, a watch his father had left him that hadn't been fashionable in 30 years, and drove a silver sedan with 200,000 miles on it that he hadn't gotten around to replacing. Nobody in the cafe looked twice at him. That was exactly how he liked it. Emily Brooks arrived at 5:45 every morning, an hour before her shift officially started, because the number 11 bus from her neighborhood only ran on the half hour, and she had learned years ago that being early was cheaper than being late. She tied her apron in the back room while the espresso machines were still warming up, restocked the pastry case, wiped down every table in the front room, and had fresh coffee ready before her manager Daniel Ross walked through the door at 6:30, with yesterday's grievances already polished and loaded. She was 29 years old, had been working at Brewer Street Cafe for 4 years, earned $11.40 an hour plus whatever tips the morning crowd felt like leaving, and had not once in those 4 years called in sick, been late, or failed to remember the regular order of every customer who came in more than twice. She did this not because she expected anything in return. She did it because it was the job, and the job deserved to be done right. The October morning outside was the kind that Boston did better than almost any other city cold enough to justify a coat. Clear enough that the light off the Charles turned everything gold before 9. Inside Brewer Street, the heat from the espresso machines and the bodies of the early rush crowd kept the temperature comfortable, and the smell of fresh ground coffee, mixed with cinnamon from the morning pastries, made the place feel, for a few hours each day, like something better than ordinary life. Emily moved through the room with the ease of someone who had memorized its geometry 2 steps around the corner table, lean left past the column, pivot at the service station, and she did it while keeping her eyes on the room, watching for empty cups, for raised hands, for the particular look of someone who needed something but didn't want to ask. Marcus Carter had found Brewer Street 6 months ago, when his usual meeting spot had been bought out and converted into a co-working space with exposed ductwork and mandatory name tags. He had tried 3 other places in the intervening weeks: a hotel lobby cafe that was too loud, a bakery on Newberry Street where someone had recognized him and spent 20 minutes asking for investment advice, a chain location near the expressway that had the feel of a place designed by people who had never needed to sit in one. Brewer Street had been a referral from a colleague who described it as nothing special, which turned out to mean that it was exactly the right kind of place. It asked nothing of you, it delivered what it promised, and it left you alone. A colleague had mentioned it in passing. Marcus had come in once, sat in the window seat by the second column, found the coffee stronger than he expected and the noise level lower than he had any right to hope for, and had been coming back every Tuesday and Thursday morning since. He always sat at the same table. He always ordered the same thing. He always paid in cash and left a 20 under his cup when he left. He had never told anyone who he was, and no one had ever asked. "Black coffee, large," Emily said when he walked in that Tuesday, already turning toward the machine. He hadn't placed the order yet. He looked up from his phone, a little startled, and she glanced back over her shoulder. "You've been coming in every Tuesday for 6 months," she said, without any particular pride. "Seemed easier than making you say it." He smiled a small, genuine smile, the kind that takes a moment to arrive and means more for the delay, and said, "Thank you," and meant it. And she nodded and went back to work, and neither of them said anything more than that. But Marcus watched her for a few minutes after she brought his cup. Watched the way she remembered every name, every preference, every small particular that made a customer feel seen instead of served. Watched the way she absorbed the sharp edges of her manager's corrections without deflating, without shrinking, without losing the quality of attention she brought to every table. He had been in business for 19 years. He knew what that kind of person was worth. He filed it away in the part of his mind that never stopped working, and turned back to his contracts. He was deep into a merger agreement with a logistics firm out of Atlanta when his phone rang. His assistant's name on the screen. He answered, listened for 12 seconds, stood up, gathered his laptop and his phone and his jacket, and walked out of Brewer Street Cafe at 9:17 in the morning without once looking under his chair. The briefcase, dark brown leather, worn soft at the corners, with a combination lock that hadn't been needed in years because it was never out of his sight, stayed exactly where he had put it, handle tilted slightly toward the wall. It was a customer named Greg who found it, 20 minutes later. He'd been sitting at the adjacent table and noticed it when he stood to leave. He picked it up, looked around the cafe with the expression of a man trying to locate either its owner or a reasonable excuse not to deal with it, and carried it to the counter. By the time Emily got back from the kitchen, 3 people had gathered around it. One of them, a heavy-set man in a construction vest, was turning it over in his hands. "Feels like there's something in it," he said. "Could be cash." The woman next to him laughed, not unkindly, but with the particular freedom of someone who had no stake in the outcome. "Wouldn't that be something?" she said. Daniel Ross came out from the back office with the expression he always wore when something interrupted his carefully managed sense of order. He looked at the briefcase, looked at the small crowd, and reached for it with the authority of a man who believed that physical proximity to a problem made him responsible for its solution. "We'll put it behind the counter," he said. "Someone calls for it, we'll figure it out. If nobody claims it in a week." He shrugged. The shrug of a man leaving the sentence to finish itself. "Could be thousands in there," the man in the construction vest said again. "You don't know." Emily took a step forward. "It belongs to someone," she said. Her voice was even, which was how her voice always was. But there was something underneath it that made Daniel look at her sideways. "We should try to return it." Daniel's expression shifted into the particular variant of condescension he reserved for ideas he found inconvenient. "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" he said. "We don't know who left it." Emily nodded once. "The camera," she said, "and the receipt. He paid cash, but I remember him. I can look him up." She didn't wait for permission. She went to the point-of-sale system, pulled up the transaction from 9:04. She knew the time, because she had rung it up herself and found that he had paid cash, no card, no loyalty account, no name attached to the order. She checked the cameras. The image from the front of house showed his face clearly enough. She checked his seat, checked the table behind his seat, and found nothing but a clean surface and the ghost of a coffee ring. Then she went back to the briefcase and, with Daniel watching with his arms crossed, opened the outer pocket, which was unlocked, and found a single business card tucked into the sleeve along the interior seam. It was plain white, embossed, with no logo, just a name, a title, and a company. Marcus Carter, CEO, Carter Holdings, LLC. There was no phone number, there was no email, there was nothing else. Emily held the card for a moment, read it again, and then looked up at Daniel. "Carter Holdings," she said. "I think I know where that is." Daniel took the card from her, read it, and made a sound that fell somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "That's out in Newton," he said, "near 40 miles from here. You're going to drive 40 miles to return a briefcase to a guy who probably has 17 of them?" He set the card on the counter. "Leave it behind the counter. If he wants it, he'll call." Emily picked the card back up. She looked at the briefcase. She thought about the way Marcus Carter had smiled when she remembered his order, the unhurried quality of his attention, the watch on his wrist that looked like it had been through something. She did not think about any of this for very long. "I'll switch my afternoon shift," she said. "Marcus can cover for me." Daniel stared at her. "You're serious?" "Yes." "That's going to cost you, I know," she said. "It's fine." It was not, strictly speaking, fine. The shift trade cost her 4 hours of work, and the car rental from the agency 2 blocks over cost her $63 plus a fuel charge, which was not far from what she made in a full day after taxes. The woman at the rental counter gave her a Toyota with a cracked side mirror and 92,000 miles on it, which Emily took without complaint. She put the briefcase carefully on the passenger seat, buckled it in out of habit, a habit she couldn't have explained if asked, and pulled out of the parking garage at 12:40 in the afternoon. The woman in the cubicle next to the break room told her she was being ridiculous. The short-order cook told her she was a good person, but that good people finished last. A regular customer who overheard the conversation shook his head slowly, with the expression of a man watching someone make a mistake he recognized. Only one of the other waitresses, a woman named Kara, who had been there 7 years and had seen everything twice, said anything different. "Just be careful driving," she said. "The expressway's a mess afternoon." Emily thanked her and left. She took Route 9 out toward Newton because it was the way she knew and because the GPS on her phone had a tendency to route her through neighborhoods that added time she didn't want to spend. The rain started about 15 miles out, not the hard driving rain that clears itself up quickly, but the thin, persistent kind that coats the windshield in a film that the wipers can't quite keep up with. She turned them to high and kept her speed steady. The rental car felt underpowered on the incline past the reservoir, and somewhere around the 20-mile mark it shuddered. The dashboard lit up with an orange symbol she didn't recognize, and the engine lost about a third of its authority without warning. She pulled onto the shoulder and sat for a moment, with her hands on the wheel, watching the traffic pass, feeling the vehicle rock slightly with each truck that went by. She checked the briefcase first, an instinct she noticed and did not question, and then she checked her own hands, which were steady, which she was glad about. She looked at the dashboard symbol, looked at her phone, and was about to search for it when a panel van pulled up behind her with its hazards blinking. The driver, a man in his 50s with a gray beard and paint-stained work gloves tucked in his vest pocket, walked up to her window and said, "Engine light?" She said yes. He said it was probably the mass airflow sensor, that the car would drive but wouldn't be happy about it, and that if she was heading into Newton, she could make it if she kept under 55, and didn't ask too much of it on the hills. He said it the way a man says something true when there's no reason to say anything else, and then walked back to his van and pulled away without asking for anything. Emily sat for another 20 seconds, checked the briefcase on the passenger seat, still buckled, still there, and pulled back onto the road. While she was doing all of this, Marcus Carter was in his office on the 14th floor of the Carter Holdings building in Newton, having already turned the morning inside out, looking for what he had lost. His assistant had checked with the building concierge, the parking garage attendant, and the car service driver, before Marcus remembered, with a cold clarity that arrived like a hand closing around his chest, exactly where he had left it. He called Brewer Street Cafe. The phone rang 11 times. He called again. This time Daniel answered, and Daniel confirmed, with a kind of officious regret, that yes, a briefcase had been found, and yes, it was behind the counter, and they would keep it safe until someone could come for it. Marcus was already standing when he asked if anyone had looked inside. Daniel said they had checked the outer pocket for identification. Marcus asked if there was a business card. Daniel said yes. Marcus said he would be there within the hour. He had his assistant call for a car and was putting on his jacket when Nathan Green knocked and opened his office door simultaneously, which was a habit Marcus had stopped correcting because correcting it had never worked. Nathan was 61, had been Marcus's lawyer since Carter Holdings was a 3-person LLC operating out of a rented office in Dorchester, and had the particular quality of steadiness that comes from having seen a person through both their worst decisions and their best ones. "It's in the cafe?" Nathan said. Marcus said yes. Nathan said, "The merger documents." Marcus said yes, and Nathan was quiet for a moment, which was not like him. "There's an encrypted drive in there," Nathan said. Marcus said he was aware. "And the letter?" Nathan said, quietly, because he knew what the letter was. Marcus looked at him. "Yes," he said, "the letter." He did not say anything else. Nathan did not need him to. The merger documents 112 pages of confidential terms governing the acquisition of a regional logistics company that would, once finalized, expand Carter Holdings' operational footprint across 6 northeastern states, represented roughly $40 million in projected annual revenue. The encrypted drive Marcus knew they were valuable. He was also aware, in the precise and unsentimental way that comes from years of managing risk, that they were replaceable. Documents could be re-executed. Drives could be wiped and reloaded. The money behind them was not real in any way that had ever made Marcus Carter lose sleep. The letter was not replaceable. It was 2 pages, handwritten on cream stationery, in the handwriting of a woman who had been gone for 4 years. His wife, Diane, had written it 3 weeks before she died, written it and sealed it and given it to Nathan to keep, with instructions that it be placed in Marcus's hands when Nathan judged the time was right. Nathan had placed it in his hands at a dinner 18 months after the funeral, in a restaurant booth in the South End, and Marcus had read it 3 times that night, and then folded it and put it in the inner pocket of the briefcase, which went with him everywhere, because he could not think of a safer place for something he could not afford to lose. He had never had it copied. He had never photographed it. It was the only version in existence, and it said things that he had needed to hear said, and the thought of it sitting behind a cafe counter, while a condescending manager decided what to do with it, made something shift in his chest that did not shift often. He was in the elevator when his phone rang again. His assistant, calling to say that the car was downstairs. He said he'd be there in 3 minutes. He was in the lobby when the security desk called up to say that a woman was at the front entrance, asking to speak with someone from Carter Holdings. She was carrying a brown leather briefcase. She said she had driven it from the city. The lobby of Carter Holdings on a Tuesday afternoon was the kind of space that announces itself without trying 20-foot ceilings, gray marble floors, a reception desk staffed by 2 people in matching blazers, and a security station that took its job seriously. Emily had been in lobbies like this before, in the way that anyone from her neighborhood had been in them, delivering something, picking something up, waiting in the chairs near the door, rather than in the interior seating that was implicitly reserved for people who were expected. She was aware of this, and she was aware that being aware of it did not oblige her to feel small about it, so she didn't. She walked in the same way she walked into the cafe on a busy morning, with the directional focus of someone who has a task and intends to complete it. Emily Brooks walked in from the parking structure, carrying the briefcase in both hands and wearing her cafe apron because she had forgotten to take it off, which she noticed only when the security guard's eyes dropped to it, with the particular expression of a man deciding how to phrase a question. She explained what she was there for. He listened with the careful neutrality of someone who had heard many explanations in this lobby and believed roughly a third of them. He called up to the front desk. The front desk called a number. There was a pause of about 90 seconds. Then Nathan Green came off the elevator. He was moving faster than a man of 61 usually moves through a marble lobby, and he stopped when he saw the briefcase in Emily's hands with an expression that was not quite relief and not quite disbelief, but something in the space between them. Is that he started, and then stopped, and then said, "Where did you come from?" Emily told him. Nathan stared at her for a moment. Then he said, "Come upstairs." She started to say that she only needed to leave it, that she didn't need to come up, that she had the rental car in the garage and a drive back to the city to make before 5. Nathan said, "Please." And there was something in how he said it, a word he probably didn't use very often in that building, that made her follow him to the elevator. Marcus was coming down as they were going up. They met on the 14th floor, in the corridor outside the elevator bank, and Emily held out the briefcase toward him with both hands, the way you carry something that belongs to someone else and have been careful with, and he took it from her and stood there with it for a moment, without speaking. Then he set it on the floor, worked the combination with his thumb, 3 numbers, entered without looking, the way you enter a combination you've used 10,000 times, and opened the case. He went to the inner pocket first. His fingers found the envelope. He held it, just held it, for 3 or 4 seconds that felt longer than they were, and then he let out a breath that had probably been accumulating since somewhere around 9:20 that morning. He looked up at Emily. His eyes were wet at the edges, which he did not try to conceal. "Why did you drive it out here?" he said. It was a real question. Not the rhetorical kind, not the kind that contains its own answer. He genuinely did not understand it yet. Emily looked at him steadily. "Because it's yours," she said. "Someone left something behind. It needed to go back to them. That's all." He looked at her for another moment. "Did you look inside?" She shook her head. "The outer pocket. For your name. That's all." Marcus nodded slowly. Then he reached into the jacket he was wearing and took out a checkbook, an actual paper checkbook, the kind very few people still carried, which seemed consistent with everything else about him, and he wrote out a figure and tore the check loose and held it toward her. She looked at it without touching it. The number on it was $5,000. For your trouble, he said. For the rental. The time. The no thank you, she said. He pulled the check back slightly, then held it out again. Please, he said. It's not I know what it is, she said. I'm saying no. He increased the figure. She shook her head again. He went higher. And she didn't look at the number at all that time, just looked at him with the even patience of someone who has made up their mind and doesn't need to keep making it. Why won't you take it? He said, and he asked it the way he asked everything directly, without performance, wanting to know. Emily was quiet for a second. Then she said, if I only do the right thing when there's money in it, then it's not really the right thing anymore. It's just a transaction. There was a silence in the corridor. Nathan Green, standing 6 feet behind Marcus with his hands in his pockets, looked at the floor with an expression Emily couldn't read. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. In 19 years of building a company, he had dealt with hundreds of people, contractors, partners, vendors, employees at every level of every hierarchy, and the number of them who had said anything like that to him in that particular way, without calculation or performance, was a number he could count on one hand. He put the checkbook back in his pocket. Can I ask you something else? He said. She waited. Do you like the work you're doing? She thought about it honestly, the way she did most things. Parts of it, she said. I'm good at the customer part. The rest of it. She paused. I've always thought I could do more. I just haven't had the chance to find out if that's true. Marcus looked at her for another moment. Then he said, I'd like to give you that chance, if you're willing. She told him she didn't have a college degree. He said he was aware that that was something people often led with, and that it had never been the thing he found most useful about a person. She told him she had no corporate experience, no training, no background in logistics or operations, or whatever it was his company actually did all day. He said that the people in his building with the most training had occasionally been the hardest to teach, because training sometimes calcified into habit, and habit sometimes made people stop seeing what was actually in front of them. She told him she was skeptical of the whole situation. He said that was probably the most sensible thing anyone had said to him in a week. He gave her a card, this one, with a phone number on it, and said that if she came to the Carter Holdings offices the following Monday morning, she would meet with Linda Harper, his director of human resources, and that they would talk through what a development track might look like for someone starting without a formal background. He said she was under no obligation. He said he would understand if she didn't come. He said it the way a person says something they mean, without the padding of extra words. Emily stood in the elevator, on the way down, and thought about what had just happened, turning it over the way you turn over, something you found on the ground, that might be valuable and might be nothing. She thought about the card in her hand, the number on it, the particular way Marcus Carter had looked at her when he said she had always thought she could do more. She thought about whether she believed him not about the job, but about the premise, the idea that what she had done that afternoon was something rather than nothing. She decided she did believe him, which was not the same as not being afraid. She was afraid. She rode the elevator down 14 floors with the fear sitting in her chest like a stone she had picked up on purpose, and she walked out of the lobby into the Newton afternoon and got into the rental car and drove back to the city with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, because she needed to think. She spent the weekend doing what she always did when she needed to think clearly. She cleaned her apartment, did 2 loads of laundry, organized the shelf above her desk where she kept the books she meant to read and the notes she meant to file, and went to bed at 10 on Sunday night with a clarity that felt, if not like confidence, then like its close relative. She had made a decision. Decisions were things you made and then lived with, not things you kept making over and over until you felt certain, because certainty was not how decisions worked. Emily went back to Brewer Street the next morning and gave Daniel 2 weeks' notice. Daniel took it the way he took most information that didn't align with his assumptions, with a brief expression of something between surprise and irritation, quickly smoothed over into a smile that didn't use his eyes. I think you're making a mistake, he said pleasantly. These opportunities don't pan out the way people imagine. A CEO meets 1,000 people a year, He'll forget you by Friday. Emily folded her apron and set it on the counter. She didn't say anything to that, because there was nothing particularly worth saying. Kara gave her a hug on her last day. The short-order cook gave her a container of the chicken soup she'd mentioned once that she liked. The man in the construction vest, who had been in nearly every morning all week as if he knew she was leaving, said, "Good luck, kid," and left a 20 under his cup. She drove home in the October rain and sat at her kitchen table for a long time, not eating, not watching anything, just sitting with the particular quality of quiet that surrounds a decision you can't take back. She showed up Monday at 8:50. Linda Harper was a woman in her early 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the kind of direct attention that suggested she had evaluated a great many people and intended to evaluate this one honestly. They talked for 2 hours. Emily had expected to be asked about her resume, her skills, her experience, and was prepared for the gaps in all three. Linda asked her about those things, but she also asked her about the cafe, what she did well, what she found hard, what she would have changed if she'd been able to. She asked Emily to describe a situation where something had gone wrong at work and walk her through what she'd done. Emily described a morning 6 months ago when 2 servers had called in. The espresso machine had malfunctioned, they were down to 1 working register, and the morning rush had come in anyway. She had reorganized the floor, rerouted the orders, kept the wait times under 12 minutes, and apologized personally to every customer who waited more than 8. Linda wrote something down. Emily couldn't tell what. The program Marcus had described was real, structured, and demanding. It was a 12-month development track that Carter Holdings ran for non-traditional hires, people who had come from backgrounds without formal corporate credentials, but had demonstrated something that proved difficult to teach. In the first 3 months, Emily was assigned to the customer operations team as a junior coordinator. She answered calls. She tracked complaints. She sat in on client meetings and was permitted to observe, but not to speak unless asked. She made mistakes, a routing error that cost a client 4 hours of delivery time, a miscommunication in a vendor chain that took 2 days to untangle, and she documented every one of them in the written reflection log that the program required, because that was the rule, and the rule deserved to be followed. Marcus did not treat her differently than the other people in the program. This was, she came to understand, a form of respect, the kind that assumes you are capable of meeting the same standard as everyone else, rather than the kind that lowers the standard and calls the lowering kindness. He was not cold to her. He simply expected from her what he expected from everyone, which turned out to be a great deal. He stopped by the operations floor twice a month, not to check on her specifically, but to walk the room the way he had probably walked rooms for 20 years, quietly, attentively, stopping to ask questions of whoever was near. Once he stopped at her workstation while she was working through a logistics dispute with a vendor in Cincinnati, and she was in the middle of a sentence when she realized he was standing behind her, and she did not let herself falter, because faltering would not have helped Cincinnati, and finished the call, and he nodded when she put the phone down and moved on without saying anything, which she found, oddly, more encouraging than any comment would have been. There was a night in February, 4 months in, when she sat in her apartment at 11:30, with a spreadsheet she had been working on for 6 hours, and a notation from a senior coordinator that her analysis was off by a factor that made the whole thing unusable, and she cried properly, fully, the kind of crying that happens when exhaustion and doubt overlap in a way that makes the future feel like it belongs to someone else. She sat with it. She went to bed. She woke up at 5:30 and went back to the spreadsheet. She found the error by 7:15. A formula that had propagated incorrectly through 4 columns fixed it, reran the analysis, and had the corrected version on the senior coordinator's desk before 9. Later that week, Marcus stopped by her workstation again. She was not sure how he knew about the spreadsheet, but he did, because he always seemed to know the things that mattered. "I started Carter Holdings when I was 31 years old," he said, leaning against the partition with his arms crossed the way he did when he was going to say something real. "Before that, I spent 9 years getting turned down for funding, for partnerships, for contracts, for jobs I applied for after the company failed the first time. I have 214 rejection letters in a file at home. I kept them." He looked at her, I kept them because I wanted to remember what it felt like to keep going anyway. You kept going. He moved on. She went back to her work. She did not cry again that winter. In June, at the end of her 8th month in the program, Linda Harper called her into a meeting that she was told would be a progress review. She arrived to find that the meeting was not a progress review. It was a presentation, and she was not the presenter. Marcus stood at the front of the room, in front of the full leadership team, 12 people, some of whom she recognized and some she didn't, all of them senior to her, by years and titles. She hadn't had time yet to fully memorize, and he said that he wanted to tell them a story. He pulled up a camera feed on the screen at the front of the room, grainy, the angle slightly off, but clear enough. Brewer Street Cafe. The briefcase under the chair. Emily appearing at the counter after another customer brought it forward. The conversation with Daniel. Emily going to the file, to the camera, to the business card in the outer pocket. He ran it forward to the exterior camera, which showed Emily walking out of the cafe with the briefcase, getting into a rental car, driving away. He had more footage sourced, he said, from the rental car company's fleet tracker, from a traffic camera at the highway on-ramp, from the lobby camera at Carter Holdings on the afternoon she arrived. He showed the lobby feed. Emily in her apron, carrying the briefcase in both hands, explaining herself to a security guard who clearly didn't know what to do with her. He let it run until Nathan appeared, until the elevator, until Emily walked off-screen with her head up and her hands full. Then he turned off the screen and turned to the room. I offered her $5,000, he said. She said no. I offered her more. She said no again. She had spent $63 of her own money, 4 hours of paid work, and the better part of a full day to return something that wasn't hers to a person she didn't know because it was the right thing to do. He paused. He was not a man who paused for effect. He paused because he was finding the words. You cannot train that, he said. You can train competence. You can train process. You can train almost every skill this company needs. But you cannot train the thing that makes a person do the right thing when no one is watching and there is nothing in it for them. That is either there or it isn't. And in Emily Brooks, it is there. The room was quiet for a long moment. Linda Harper was looking at her desk. A senior vice president named Greg Tillman, who was not known for being easily moved, was looking at his hands. Marcus looked at Emily. I'm recommending you for the position of manager, customer experience program, effective the 1st of next month, he said. If you'll take it. Emily sat still for a moment. Yes, she said. I'll take it. She said it the way she said most things. Plainly, completely, without decoration. The position came with a team of 7, a budget she was responsible for, a client portfolio that covered 3 regional distribution partners, and a level of accountability she had not yet carried in her life. She found that she was not afraid of it. She found that she was, in some way, she couldn't quite put into words, ready for it not because she had been trained for it, but because every shift at Brewer Street, every table she had turned on a 2-server morning, every complaint she had absorbed and redirected and resolved had been preparation for exactly this. Only, she hadn't known it at the time. She built her team carefully, the way someone builds anything they intend to last, one good decision at a time, with more attention paid to how people worked than to what their resumes said. Her first quarter numbers were not spectacular. Her second quarter numbers were. Linda Harper stopped by her office one afternoon in September and said, without preamble, "You're making the rest of the program look good," and Emily said, "Then make the rest of the program better." And Linda laughed, which was apparently not something she did in the office very often. She saw Marcus on Thursdays, usually in passing, occasionally in meetings where she was now one of the people presenting rather than observing. He treated her the way he treated everyone directly, with the presumption of competence, with the particular economy of praise that meant that when he did say something positive, it carried weight. He had a habit, when passing someone in the corridor, of asking one real question and listening to the full answer, which was rarer than it should have been in any organization of this size. Once, in the elevator, he asked her if she missed the cafe. She thought about it honestly. The people, she said, not the work. The people were good. He nodded. Good people are good wherever they are, he said. The elevator opened. They went their separate ways. It was the kind of exchange that sounds ordinary and isn't. There were days when the work was extraordinary, and days when it was just work, which Emily had come to understand was not a disappointment, but the actual shape of a real career, and she appreciated that no one at Carter Holdings had tried to tell her otherwise. There were client calls that went sideways for reasons nobody could have predicted, and that she spent 3 hours repairing on a Friday afternoon when she had planned to leave at 4. There were team meetings where two of her people disagreed about a process in a way that had no clean resolution and required her to make a call that one of them would not be happy with, and she made the call, and she stood by it, and she explained her reasoning rather than her authority. And over time she found that this approach produced a team that argued well and recovered fast and did not carry grudges past the end of the workday. She had not been trained to manage. She managed the way she had done everything. By paying attention, by taking the thing seriously, by refusing to let difficulty become an excuse. Linda Harper told her once, in one of their quarterly check-ins, that several of the senior managers had specifically requested her team as a pilot for new client programs. Because they know your people will handle it, Linda said. Emily said, "Thank you." Linda said, "That is not a compliment. That is a fact. There is a difference." Emily said she knew, and did. In November, a year and 3 weeks after Emily had walked into Carter Holdings' lobby carrying a stranger's briefcase in both hands, Marcus announced at a company-wide meeting the establishment of the Diane Carter Foundation Scholarship, named for his wife, funded from his personal holdings, structured to provide 12-month development grants for workers in low-wage service jobs who showed the kind of character and capability that formal credentials had never managed to capture. The application process was built around a values-based assessment rather than academic history. The first cohort would include 8 recipients. The program administrator was Emily Brooks. She had not been told in advance. She found out the same way everyone else did, and she sat in her chair in the 3rd row, with her hands folded in her lap, and a composure that only partially concealed the fact that she was, quietly and privately, overwhelmed. After the meeting, she found Marcus in the corridor outside the conference room and said, simply, "Thank you." He said, "You earned it." She said, "No, I mean, for her. For naming it for her." He was quiet for a moment. "She would have understood exactly what you did that day," he said. "Probably better than I did at first." He said it looking somewhere past her shoulder, the way people look when they're addressing a memory, and she didn't say anything more, because there was nothing more needed. The November light came early and left early, and by 4 in the afternoon the streets outside were the deep blue-gray of a New England dusk that looked the same in every decade, every year, as if the city had decided on a particular shade and would not be moved from it. On the Thursday after the announcement, Marcus walked into Brewer Street Cafe at 7:43 in the morning, because some habits are worth keeping. The place had changed, slightly new chairs, a different arrangement of tables, a specials board in a different hand. But the smell was the same, and the light through the front windows was the same, and the sound of the espresso machine warming up was the same, and those things were enough. He sat at the table by the 2nd column, the one with the window and the particular angle that let you see the whole room without being conspicuous about it. He set his briefcase under the chair. He opened his laptop. He did not order yet, because he was early. Emily walked in at 8:15, not in an apron, not behind the counter, but through the front door like any other customer. She was wearing a gray wool coat he hadn't seen before, and she looked, he thought, like someone who had been somewhere and come back, changed not in any way that was visible exactly, but in the way that a person stands and moves when they have found out what they are capable of and decided to keep being it. She saw him immediately. The table by the 2nd column was the table he always used, after all, and came over without any of the hesitation that used to texture her interactions with him in the early days when he had still been, to her, an unknown quantity. She sat down across from him, and he moved his laptop slightly to one side, which was how he indicated that someone had his full attention. "I thought you might be here," she said. "You're always here on Thursdays." "Old habit," he said. She looked around the room for a moment, at the cafe that had been her whole world for 4 years, and was now just a place she had once worked. "I never asked you something," she said. Why this cafe? There are 100 places closer to your office. He thought about it. No one recognized me here, he said. I could just be a person. She nodded slowly. I knew you were more than you looked, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Not much got past you. Not much got past me. She agreed, without modesty, because modesty was different from honesty, and she had always been better at the honest kind. The coffee arrived black, large, because whoever was working the counter that morning had apparently been paying attention, or had been told. Emily wrapped both hands around her cup, which was not coffee but tea, and looked out the window at the October street where the year was turning again, and the leaves were coming down the same way they always came down on this block, in the particular disorder of things that happen naturally and on their own schedule. If you hadn't forgotten the briefcase, she said, which was not quite a question. He smiled the same small, arriving smile she had seen the first time she'd handed him his coffee, without waiting for him to order. I used to think I wasn't the kind of person who forgot things, he said. Maybe I needed to be. She looked at him. I didn't know, she said, that doing the right thing could take you somewhere. I thought it was just what you did, because it was right. That's why it works, he said, when it's not for anything, when it's just the thing. She nodded. She looked out the window again, at a city going about its morning, at the ordinary, irreversible motion of a day that had already begun. She would have liked this, Marcus said quietly. This conversation. Emily did not ask who he meant. She already knew. She raised her cup toward him slightly, an informal acknowledgement, the kind that requires no words, and he inclined his head the same way, and outside the window the leaves came down the way they always did, and the light was gold the way Boston light was gold on certain October mornings, and there was nothing left to prove and nothing left to explain, and the day was just starting. The scholarship fund received 83 applications in its first month. Emily read every one. She read them on her lunch breaks and on the commuter rail home, and on Sunday mornings at her kitchen table with tea going cold beside her laptop, because she had been told she would be involved in the selection process, and she intended to be involved in the way she was involved in everything, thoroughly, honestly, without shortcuts. The applications came from restaurant workers and hospital orderlies and retail clerks and warehouse staff and school custodians and hotel housekeepers, and one person who had been a parking attendant for 11 years and had taught himself data analysis in the evenings on a library computer, and she read every word of every application with the particular attention of someone who understood what it cost to put your real self on a page and send it somewhere hoping it mattered. She marked 8 of them. Then she went back and marked 2 more. Then she went back once more and read the whole stack again, because she had the time and the applications deserved it, and because she thought, if she was honest, that she would have wanted someone to do the same for her. Marcus stopped by her office on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks into the review process, with his jacket over his arm and his phone in his pocket, the way he carried it when he was done for the day, and willing to be a person rather than a CEO. He leaned in the doorway and looked at the stack of folders on her desk. How many? He said. She said 10, for now. He said the first cohort was 8. She looked at him. He said, 10 is fine. She nodded and turned back to her desk. He started to leave, and then stopped in the doorway, and said, without turning around, she would have read all of them too. He left before she could respond. She sat with that for a moment, and then she picked up the next folder, and she read,